Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're stepping into a world of ambition, rebellion, and some seriously cunning power plays. You ready to meet Ali Pasha? He's a name that still echoes through Greek history. And believe me, his story is one for the books.
He's definitely one of those figures who embodies the complexities of his time. Imagine a ruler who could be unbelievably cruel one minute and then champion the arts the next. Ali Pasha was the Pasha of Ioannina in the late 18th century. But getting there, well, that's a wild ride in itself.
Okay, so before we get into that, can you quickly break down what a pasha even was back then, just to make sure we're all on the same page here?
Absolutely. Think of a Pasha as a high-ranking official in the Ottoman Empire, kind of like a governor with a lot of clout. They were appointed by the Sultan but often had a ton of autonomy, almost like mini-rulers in their own right. And Ali Pasha, he took that autonomy and ran with it, building up a power base that even challenged the Sultan himself.
And to think, it all started with him as a bandit leader in Albania. Talk about a career change. Our source, Ali Pasha of Ioannina, really paints a picture of his rise to power. What was it about the Ottoman system that allowed someone like Ali Pasha to climb the ranks so effectively?
Well, the Ottoman Empire, while vast and powerful, wasn't always a monolithic structure. You had all these moving parts, different factions vying for power. And Ali Pasha was a master at exploiting those divisions. He wasn't just ambitious, he was incredibly shrewd and knew how to play the game. He built alliances, manipulated rivals, and wasn't afraid to use force when necessary.
He even tangled with Napoleon, right? I remember the source mentioning how Ali Pasha managed to outsmart him and gain control of Arda. That must have been a tense situation.
It was. Napoleon was a rising star at the time, and his ambitions in the Mediterranean put him right on a collision course with Ali Pasha. But Ali Pasha, ever the pragmatist, saw this as an opportunity. He played on Napoleon's desire for a quick victory, tricked him into thinking they were allies, and then bam, snatched Arda right out from under him.
Wow, that's some serious 4D chess right there. But this maneuvering wasn't just about playing European powers, right? He also had to deal with those who resisted his rule closer to home, like the Souliotes. They seemed like they were a constant thorn in his side.
Oh, absolutely. The Souliotes were Greek-speaking Orthodox Christians, fiercely protective of their independence. They occupied this mountainous region called Suli, perfect for defense. And they had a reputation for being incredible warriors. Imagine a community where every man and woman was practically born with a rifle in their hands.
I'm picturing something out of those epic mountain battle scenes in movies. So how did they hold out against Ali Pasha for so long? Was it just their terrain, or was there something more to their success?
Their terrain was definitely a factor, but it was more than that. The Souliotes were masters of guerrilla warfare, able to strike quickly and melt back into the mountains, and they were united by a shared sense of identity, a fierce determination to protect their way of life. This made them incredibly resilient against Ali Pasha's attempts to subdue them. In fact, they managed to repel two major attacks from his forces in 1790 and 1792.
Two major victories against a power like Ali Pasha. That must have made them legends in the region. But knowing how relentless Ali Pasha was, I can't imagine he just gave up after those losses.
You're absolutely right. He may have lost those battles, but his desire to control Suli only intensified, and unfortunately the Souliotes' luck wouldn't hold out forever. The source goes on to describe a much more somber chapter, the siege and eventual fall of Suli in 1803.
This is where things get really tragic, isn't it? Especially with what happened after the Souliotes surrendered.
It's a dark moment in Ali Pasha's story. He agreed to let the Souliotes leave peacefully, but then broke his word and attacked them as they retreated. This betrayal forced them to flee to Parga and other locations, scattering the community and marking the end of Suli's independence.
Hearing that makes those early victories feel even more bittersweet. It sounds like the fall of Suli really cemented Ali Pasha's reputation for ruthlessness.
It certainly did. And this event, the fall of Suli, is actually really crucial for understanding what happens next. It's not just about Ali Pasha's ambition, it's about setting the stage for one of the most defining events in Greek history, the Greek Revolution.
Okay, so we're talking about the revolution that kicked off in 1821, right? The one that ultimately led to Greece breaking free from the Ottoman Empire.
Exactly. And while the revolution played out on a much larger stage, the events we've been discussing, especially what happened to the Souliotes, played a significant role in fueling the flames of rebellion. Remember those Souliotes who managed to escape were scattered? But they were not broken. Many of them went on to become key figures in the fight for Greek independence.
So even in defeat, they became symbols of resistance against Ottoman rule. That's powerful. But our source focuses specifically on Epirus, the region where Ali Pasha held so much power. What happened there after his downfall?
Epirus, with its diverse population of Albanian Muslims, Greeks, and other smaller groups, became a focal point of the struggle. You have to remember the Greek Revolution wasn't just about expelling the Ottomans, it was about defining what it meant to be Greek and who would control the future of the region. This inevitably led to conflict, not just with the Ottomans, but also between different groups within Epirus itself.
So it wasn't a simple, clear-cut fight for freedom. It sounds like things got pretty messy on the ground.
They absolutely did. It was a chaotic period of shifting alliances, power grabs, and brutal reprisals. You have to imagine the atmosphere, the uncertainty, the fear, the constant threat of violence. And all of this is happening against the backdrop of the broader geopolitical game, with European powers like Britain, France, and Russia all vying for influence in the region.
It's amazing how these personal stories, like that of the Souliotes, are intertwined with these larger historical forces. Did any of the uprisings in Epirus manage to gain independence during the revolution?
Not right away. Our source mentions a couple of revolts in the mid-19th century, one in 1854 and another in 1878, both of which were ultimately crushed by the Ottomans. Despite the fervor of the revolution, the Ottoman grip on Epirus remained strong.
But I imagine those uprisings kept the spirit of resistance alive. It must have been frustrating for the Greeks in the area, seeing other parts of Greece gain independence while they were still under Ottoman control.
You're right. The desire for unification with Greece remained a powerful motivator. And even though many Souliotes were living in exile, they never gave up hope of returning to their homeland and seeing a free Epirus. Their story became a symbol of that enduring hope.
So when did things finally start to shift in favor of the Greeks in Epirus? Did they have to wait until the end of Ottoman rule altogether?
Well, there were some incremental gains towards the end of the 19th century. In 1881, through a series of agreements, Greece managed to expand its borders eastward, taking control of a small part of Epirus.
So not complete liberation, but a step in the right direction. It's almost like they were slowly chipping away at Ottoman control. Our source does mention, though, that this unification wasn't met with universal approval. Some Albanian Muslims in the area actively resisted becoming part of Greece.
Yes, and it's a reminder that this wasn't just a fight between Greeks and the Ottoman Empire. You had a mix of ethnicities and religions with their own aspirations and fears. Some Albanian Muslims worried about being marginalized or persecuted under Greek rule. They had a different vision for the future of Epirus.
It seems like there was always this underlying tension between the different groups in Epirus, even amidst the larger fight against Ottoman rule.
Exactly. And unfortunately, that tension came to a head during the Balkan Wars of 1912-1913. This was a conflict that pitted the Balkan League, which included Greece, against the weakening Ottoman Empire, and Epirus became a key battleground.
Is this finally when Epirus becomes fully integrated into Greece?
It is. The Greek army emerged victorious from the Balkan Wars, pushing the Ottomans out of the rest of Epirus. So finally, in 1913, after centuries of foreign rule, Epirus became part of the Greek state.
That must have been an incredible moment for those who fought so long for this outcome. But hold on, our source mentions something about more occupations in Epirus after this. It says French and Italian forces controlled the region for a few years.
Ah, yes, that's World War I, throwing a wrench into things. It's a good reminder that history rarely follows a neat linear path.
So even after winning their independence, the people of Epirus weren't entirely free from foreign influence. How did that happen?
Well, Greece was officially neutral at the start of World War I, but the country was deeply divided between those who supported the Allies and those who favored the Central Powers. This internal division played out in Epirus as well, with the region ultimately being occupied by French and Italian forces from 1916 to 1920.
It's almost like they couldn't catch a break. Every time it seems like they've achieved stability, something comes along to disrupt it. But thankfully, this occupation was relatively short-lived, right?
It was. By 1923, with the Treaty of Lausanne, the final borders between Albania and Greece were established, and Epirus remained a part of Greece. That pretty much marks the end of the turbulent period we've been discussing, at least in terms of major conflicts and territorial shifts.
So looking back, it's been quite a journey. We've gone from Ali Pasha's rise and fall to the Greek Revolution, witnessed the various uprisings and power struggles in Epirus, and even touched on the impact of World War I. It's amazing how all of these events are interconnected.
It really highlights how history is not just a collection of isolated events. It's a complex tapestry where different threads intertwine and influence each other.
And through it all, the people of Epirus showed incredible resilience. I mean, think about it. Centuries of foreign rule, then finally achieving independence. only to be plunged back into conflict and occupation. It makes you wonder about the human capacity for endurance.
It does, and I think that's a key takeaway from this deep dive. The people of Epirus faced unimaginable hardships, but they never gave up hope. Their story is a testament to the power of perseverance and the enduring desire for self-determination.
And what about Ali Pasha himself? He was clearly a driving force in shaping the events of this period, even if his legacy is a complex one.
He was a man of contradictions, a brilliant strategist capable of great cruelty. He left an undeniable mark on Epirus, both positive and negative.
It makes you think about all those untold stories, doesn't it? The individual lives shaped by these sweeping events. We've been focusing on the big picture, the battles, the political maneuvering. But behind all that are countless personal journeys of courage, loss, and resilience.
Exactly. It's easy to get caught up in the grand narratives of history, but it's important to remember that those narratives are made up of individual human experiences.
Like those Souliote women at Salongo. Their story is just one example, but it's become almost legendary, a symbol of defiance in the face of impossible odds.
And it speaks to something we see time and again throughout history. Ordinary people faced with extraordinary circumstances, finding the strength to resist, to fight for their freedom, for their very survival.
Speaking of fighting for freedom, I keep coming back to Ali Pasha. He was ruthless, ambitious. But there's also this element of audacity to his story, this willingness to challenge the established order that I find fascinating.
He was a product of his time, certainly, but he also actively shaped his time. He refused to be confined by the existing power structures. He wanted to create his own destiny, and for a while he did. He built a powerful state, defied the Ottoman Sultan, and left a lasting impact on the region.
It's just a shame that his ambition was so tightly bound to brutality. Our source doesn't shy away from the darker aspects of his rule, especially his treatment of women who dared to defy him.
You're right. The story of Kyria Frosini and the other women he had drowned in Lake Ioannina is a chilling reminder of the terrible consequences of unchecked power. It's a dark stain on his legacy.
It really highlights the complexity of historical figures, doesn't it? There are rarely simple heroes and villains. It's more often shades of gray.
Precisely. And I think that's a key takeaway from our deep dive into the world of Ali Pasha and the Souliotes. History is full of these complex figures, individuals who defy easy categorization.
So as we wrap up, what are some of the key insights you hope our listener takes away from this deep dive?
I think we've seen how individual ambition, like Ali Pasha's, can intersect with broader historical forces, sometimes driving those forces, sometimes being swept up by them. We've also seen the incredible power of resistance. The Souliotes, the Greek people, their determination to fight for their freedom and shape their own destiny.
And we've learned about a truly fascinating period in Greek history, a period that's often overlooked, but that holds important lessons about power, resilience, and the human spirit.
Absolutely. And those lessons are still relevant today. The struggles for freedom, for self-determination, for recognition. These are themes that continue to resonate in many parts of the world.
It makes you realize that history isn't just about the past. It's about understanding the forces that have shaped our present and continue to shape our future.
And it's about recognizing the complexities of the past, understanding that there are often multiple perspectives, multiple truths, and that easy answers are rare.
I think that's a great note to end on. This deep dive has only scratched the surface of this fascinating period in history. If you're intrigued by what you've heard, I encourage you to dig deeper, explore the sources we've discussed, and continue the conversation.
There's so much more to discover about Ali Pasha, the Souliotes, and the forces that shaped modern Greece. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and most importantly, keep learning.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring the endlessly fascinating world of history.